Right, so as you heard, my name is Roger Walsh, and my talk today is about the topic of Bitcoin as a practical tool for individual freedom. And what that is specifically going to be broken down to is this, what Bitcoin is, how its unique properties make it a big deal, and what the implications for everyone in the room here are. So first off, because most of you guys probably don't know who I am, never heard of me before, a little bit about me. I currently work as a developer part-time for a crypto exchange. I'm really focusing on upskilling at the moment, so just doing that part-time. From New Zealand, as you can see there, that's my home country. Prior to deciding that my life's mission was to devote myself to software, I worked as a manager for a program at home where if you're on the welfare, you wanted to start your own business, I trained them about how to write a business plan. They got funding from the government and started their own business. But primarily prior to that, I worked for 10 years in law enforcement. The last year and a half, I was in the diplomatic protection team for the head of state at home in New Zealand. But why am I speaking about Bitcoin as a tool for individual freedom today? Well, it's probably best just explained if I show you this video. So years ago, I got this phone call that told me to make sure I watched the 6 o'clock news that night and to read the newspaper. I switched on the news at 6 o'clock on the main news channel at home in New Zealand, and the number one leading story was this.
Good evening. A policeman who sings about eradicating the weak has been told not to change his tune. Constable Rigel Walsh is the heavily tattooed lead singer of a thrash metal band whose songs struck the new police minister, Annette King, as warranting investigation. But as Andy Brotherston reports, Constable Walsh met his bosses today and satisfied them his alter ego has no influence on his day job.
By day, Rigel Walsh is a constable who escorts prisoners to and from the court. A large dark tattoo on his forearm is the only hint that at night he transforms into the lead singer of a heavy metal band. So heavy, it's called death thrash. Constable Walsh started the band Dawn of Azazel in 1997. They've released several albums and are now considered one of the best death thrash metal bands in the country. But should a frontman that sings about the eradication of the weak be in the force? Walsh wouldn't comment today, but he recently did talk to Nightline about his lyrics.
A war against the mediocrity of mankind, you know. I mean, for me, ever since I've been a kid, I've been really aggravated by the people who just take the easy path in life or just jump on some trend rather than thinking for themselves, and it's really aggression against that sort of, you know, those sort of people.
Police Minister Annette King called for a report into Walsh following an article about him in yesterday's Sunday Star Times. Today, Walsh met with his police bosses. They say Walsh reinforced his commitment to the values and integrity of the police, but they wouldn't say it on camera. The Associate Arts Minister, Judith Tizard, knows Walsh, and she also insists we should have no concerns about his ability as a policeman. But then late this afternoon she pulled out of an agreed interview about him. Whatever it is they're afraid of, they insist that we shouldn't be afraid of Walsh. Despite that, the band still have that angry, aggressive, heavy metal image. A dark and brooding website, publicity photos waving weapons at the camera. But Walsh says it's just theatrics.
For the record, we don't slaughter chickens, we don't sacrifice virgins, and no, we don't have weekly satanic meetings either where we kiss the ass of the devil.
The other band members also wouldn't comment today, but sources close to the band say Walsh is devastated that he's been misrepresented and that he is not a racist or a Satan worshipper. Andy Brotherston, 3 News.
So as a consequence of that, I got this letter from the district commander that more or less said, stop playing in the band or you're going to be fired. And so I'd lose my income, my future employment prospects, my reputation. And so what kind of attracted me to Bitcoin years and years later when I came across it was having had that experience of how powerless you can feel when one of these monolithic kind of engines like the police force or the news media wants to paint a certain narrative about who you are or censor your ability to express your human rights. So, look, it's a bit of a cliche to talk about Bitcoin as like the early internet or like the printing press. Today I want to make a different analogy, and that's Bitcoin is similar to gunpowder. So we first came across gunpowder, as we know, in 141 AD. Some Chinese guy was trying to make up an elixir for eternal life and dropped a cigarette in it and blew himself up. So the Chinese weren't quite sure what to do with this technology initially, right, what the killer app was. They used it for fireworks, and it made its way onto the battlefield, but primarily as a tool for kind of distraction or confusing the enemy. But they quickly discovered that the killer app was, well, killing people. And so by about 1100 AD, they were firing bombs over the enemy's parapets and things like that, blowing them up. So it's a bit of a big topic to talk about how it changed the world, even though we know how it all did. But we'll just look at one example because we're here in Riga, and it's what happened in Europe, right? So at the time, you had the linchpins of the kind of political system, right? The ultimate weapons of force were the knight and the castle, right? So the castle, you had these ridiculous-looking guys, like you see on the screen here, that had these ridiculous, elaborate outfits. To be a knight, you had to be born into a certain family. You had to spend your whole life training how to use this sort of apparatus. And you had to have the wealth to get this, these ridiculous setups that you see on the screen here, right? So what gunpowder did is it changed the most deadly weapon on the battlefield from something that was only available to these people here to a weapon that any commoner with about a week's training could use, and he was now the most deadly force on the battlefield. So it was a great equalizer about access to political power. The other linchpin of the kind of political system was the castle, right? So the enemy attacked you, you retreated inside the stone fortress, and you're pretty much invincible once you're inside, right? It was a game of attrition to really get them out of there. So it took a bit longer with the castle and gunpowder to change that. It was about 300 years of fortifications upgrading and artillery upgrading, et cetera, but it was obviously a bit of an asymmetrical trade-off, and the castle was quickly obsolete. So what that meant is prior to that, civilization was organized around these kind of stone monoliths, right? Because the enemy attacked, you had to be able to retreat inside. But because they were obsolete, this is what started the emergence of like urban sprawl, right? So people moved into towns, and this made commerce flourish, but it also empowered those towns as political entities, right? So they get their hands on firearms. They might not be able to overthrow the king, but they could bring him to the negotiating table in a much more powerful position, right? And so this dynamic as it evolved is what led from the change from the medieval fiefdom sort of system into the political state that we have today, that evolution, right? So Bitcoin, I believe, is going to be a similarly transformative technology because, look, it's not a violent tool like gunpowder is, but it is a lever of control on one of the three universal languages that we all understand, and that's love, violence, and value and money, right? So Bitcoin is a way, it's a peaceful revolution in a way that we can take the ability to express that tool away from the monopoly of the state and give it to the common man. So I think it's going to be similarly transformative to gunpowder about what it's going to do to society. However, Bitcoin is a weapon, is the point that I want to make. Bitcoin is a tool that individuals and collectors will use to gain advantage, exerting their will on others or defending themselves from that. So it's important to look at Bitcoin in that context, that Bitcoin is a weapon that people will use to exert their political force. But it's also different, right, because it's digital. And a good example to look at with this is old Philip Zimmermann and PGP. For those of you who are not familiar with what that is, it's the first kind of really robust encryption technology that was available to the public to encrypt email and text. So Philip Zimmermann wrote this up. He made it open for anyone to download. It got himself in a bit of trouble with the US government when he tried to, or got exported overseas. And the reason was, funnily enough, it was classified as a weapon, as a munition, right? So how they got around that is that they printed it in a book, which was protected by the First Amendment. They sent it overseas and people scanned the source code into their computer, and as a consequence, we all have access to this robust encryption technology, which is fabulous, right? So Bitcoin's got similar properties to that make it different from how gunpowder played out. Those three differences are that it's open for anyone to inspect and participate, right? So anyone can view the source code, anyone can work on it. There's no kind of way that some organization can capture a corner of the expertise that's required to interact with Bitcoin. The second one is that we now live in a world where instantaneous communication and collaboration can happen, right? So the internet means you can work with people over the other side of the world, and you can share and cooperate on improving and creating innovation, and it can happen almost instantaneously. So the pace of change is going to be far, far more rapid than what you've seen with something like gunpowder. But the last one, and the most important one, is that the cost of production is zero, right? So you don't need access to a factory or money or any of that stuff to be able to participate in what Bitcoin is. You just need the ability to code in a computer, right? So that's really going to change the game about what this is going to mean as a political force going forward. Because in the past, again, it's the monopoly of how these things are controlled has gone to states or kings or things like that. And as we saw with Segwit2x and this lovely famous tweet that you see on the screen here, what this means is that if one of these monopolies decides that they want to say this is what Bitcoin is, we say fuck you and just going to fork around them, right? We can organize it ourselves. So the direction the protocol is going to go, I believe, is going to be much more dictated by small informal groups rather than corporations or companies or kings or things that it has been in the past, right? These are the things that are going to move the protocol in whatever direction it goes. So to me, when this kind of ball clicked for me, this is what made me decide, oh, holy shit, I've got to quit everything and devote my whole life to writing software, because I saw the correlation between software and music. And a great example of it is this, right? So we've got the statistic here about how CoinJoin in the last year has tripled to 4%. Now, I'm never really going to be able to find out what the answer to that is. There's no way we can really know. But CoinJoin as technology is not new, right? We've had mixers forever. Blockchain.info had their mixing service 2013, 2014. Join Market was launched in 2015. Very similar to these two that you see on the bottom here. So my feeling that I think, and from talking to other people have a similar view, is that really, for lack of a better way to put it, why CoinJoin has gone up is that these guys have kind of made it cool, right, in a sense. They have taken the Bitcoin protocol. They haven't changed anything about what Bitcoin is. They've just interpreted it in a certain way, right? They've turned certain things up. They've turned other certain things down, and they've created a style and a way of transacting and using Bitcoin. People have seen that, and they thought, yeah, that's me. I dig it. This is the way I want to use Bitcoin. And so people devote their energy there, and that's the way that the protocol tends to move. And the statistics that you see there prove, that that is where the protocol is going to go if people are going to use it that way. So this is the correlation I saw with music. Is that same thing with music and trends and the way that that goes. You've got these informal communities that coalesce around common shared values, and they interpret the meaning of and a message through the use of a given medium, right? So you take your guitar and you do a little bit more of this or a little bit less of that. Same thing with your drums, a bit more of that, a bit like this. People think, yeah, I like that sort of style, and that's the way that the collective will move if there's enough energy there. So a great example of this is the emergence of distortion on the electric guitar. So the first ever time that happened was a guy called Ike Turner. He recorded the song called Rocket 88, right? And what actually happened is he was driving to the studio and his guitar amp fell off his car, and so it fucked up the speaker and it gave him this kind of weird tone. So later this guy, Dave Davies, from a band called The Kinks, he heard this and he thought, yeah, this is really cool. And how he replicated it was he actually got a razor and cut the speaker cone of his guitar amplifier. And it kind of gave this different tone to what the song that they recorded, and you probably heard it. So that was You Really Got Me, all right? And a lot of people heard that sound and they thought, yeah, that guitar tone is really cool. And so people copied it. And today, as you know, like electric guitars and distortion, they're almost ubiquitous, right? It changed the way that you saw that tool and how it was used. Now those things go hand in hand. That's the way that you use guitar. But what's the relevance of this to software? Well, I think it's bigger than a lot of people realize. Because how much of your communication today is through a digital medium? It's the majority of it, if not almost all of it for some people, right? But what's not so obvious is the decisions that are made behind the scenes for you in the subtle ways that it encourages certain behavior and discourages other certain behavior, right? And I think a great example of this, anyone here that's an Apple user has an iPhone, right? Apple says you can't do this sort of stuff and you can do this, and it controls the way you use the tool. The philosophy behind that is look, trust us, we know what we're doing, you're going to get the best user experience if you do that. And look, I recently had an experience of why that is. I wrote a piece of software called LibreTX, which lets you create Bitcoin transactions without restrictions. And how that was is I was trying to learn about how Bitcoin works under the hood. I wanted to play around with a couple of things called Sighash all, Sighash none, and Sighash single. They're pretty hard to kind of get your hands on with Electrum or Bitcoin Core, so I just wrote this thing that let me manually control all the inputs into a transaction. I learned why people don't do that, because it's a fucking pain in the ass when you've got all the access to all the options, right? So people extract this stuff away to make it simple for the user, but the devil is in the detail about what gets abstracted away and what doesn't. Anyone who's seen that Netflix documentary on Cambridge Analytica, The Big Hack? I think it's got some idea of just how the subtle ways that the algorithm can change the message that we're transmitting and what we see can have some pretty serious implications about what this flows on down the track and what that medium is used for. So what does this all mean? How can we reply this back to Bitcoin? Well, this guy called Yochai Benkler wrote this really good book called The Wealth of Networks, and subtitled How Social Production Transforms Markets and Freedom. And he wrote about this thing called the emerging information economy, I believe, which is basically because of the internet, the way the world works and markets work is dramatically changing for a lot of the reasons that I talked about those 3 points that are native to Bitcoin. So there's about 4 takeaways that I think that we can take away from what he talked about in this book that are really relevant to Bitcoin and making sure that where this goes in the future is something that is going to be controlled by these small informal groups that have the user and individual freedom at the forefront, and they're not going to be co-opted by companies or states or other people who want to manipulate the message for their own benefit. So the first one he talked about is that any sort of movement in the space has to be holistic across the 3 layers: physical, logical, and content. So what that means is physical is the device itself, the computer, the phone, whatever the physical item is. Logical is the protocol that you're speaking or the language that these machines are using to communicate with each other. And content is the human readable content that's being transmitted. Now what I've talked about so far I think is somewhere between the logical and the content side of things. But for this not to hit any bottlenecks and to be, again, a tool that empowers individuals, we have to think about the physical level. So I'm by no means an expert on that, but to me, as I understand it, that means things like mesh networks. It means making sure that wherever possible, hardware is open source, and that it's as cheap and as easily available to people as possible, so you don't have a situation where there's a massive cost of being able to interact with a network. Anyone is open and able to do that for the minimum amount of cost and money. So the second one is the emergence of social sharing and exchange as the best method of production and problem solving. So previously, we're all familiar with this model of the firm, right? A company gets a bunch of money, they see a problem or something that people want, they create a product, they sell it to you, you give them the money, and the cycle continues, right? And that's all driven around profit, right? If it can make money, then you'll do it, and if you can't, then you won't, right? And that's what drives the decisions of the market and where it moves. What Benkler talked about is that this revolution is going to bring to the fore a different style of getting things done, which is going to be what directs the market, and that's this model of social sharing and exchange. And what that really is, it's a thing called anarchist distribution, which is a very natural human behavior that we've all seen and we've all done. It's the idea of, hey man, look, check this out, I think you'll like it. Or, look, I'm having this problem, dude, can you help me how I might be able to solve this thing? So it's a very natural human behavior. But what drives it is different than in the firm system where it's extrinsic motivation, right? People use reward and punishment to try and drive people where they go. And that's where the talent is going to be directed, is where those levers are going to push them. Into a world of intrinsic motivation, right? Where people do things because it's what they believe in, it's in their heart, it's what they'd be doing if money wasn't an issue at all. They are what is going to drive firms. That's what's going to draw the talent, and this is going to be the most emerging, powerful property in the space. And I think what Holo announced yesterday is a really good example of how you're never going to be able to corner and own this thing. You have to make it about the values that are going to attract the right people and the right users and the right talent to the thing that has the values that you share about how you think this thing should go. So the third one is a re-evaluation of our personal agency and our concept of collaboration. So because we've got this magical internet world now where we can all communicate and collaborate much quickly and much quicker and much easier, it changes the way that we think about working together and the permanence of those relationships, right? So let's take Uber and taxis there. Previous to that, if you wanted to be a taxi driver, you had to get a taxi medallion and enter an agreement with a company, and it was this long, ongoing process, right? What Uber and other sort of gig economy situations have done is they've opened up a whole world of productivity that's available from these small ad hoc abilities to cooperate with people, right? So this has changed the game like that, and what really is going to allow us to be agile and to have an edge over the firm-based system is for people to be aware of the new innovative ways that they can interact together and create a better product. Like with what I've got on the left-hand side there. You don't have to take whatever someone sends to you over the television. You can create and work together and get a better system to distribute it with people by looking to your peer and seeing about how you can cooperate to create that better thing which solves your problems. The last one, though, and this is the most important one they talked about, is a shift from a passive consumer into an active participant and creator. So we're used to this model where a company comes up with some products and they lay out your options on a shelf or a counter for you to choose from, right? And we're restricted to what these guys decide that we can choose. So for this thing to really have the power that I've talked about, people need to realize that they have the agency and they can have a new system, right? Where we can look at this is shit. I don't want what this company's given to me. I can do it in a better way and I can create it and I can move in that way. And that has to be not just an outlying behavior for a few select individuals. It has to be a cultural practice, right? It's something that everyone understands that if you want a better product and you want what you want, you have to take some responsibility for contributing to that. And that can mean a whole host of things. It doesn't mean writing code, right? It can mean writing the documentation. It can mean doing a podcast. It can mean organizing a conference. It can be organizing a meetup. It can be anything that you think that is going to help move the collective in the direction that you think is going to empower individuals to move in the right direction. Because again, like I said, this is what is going to drive the market, and it's only by participation by people who want to move in that right direction is what is going to give us the product that is going to empower us rather than someone else. So my final conclusion is this, that collaboration and cooperation is our edge in the battle for this tool that's going to change the world like gunpowder, right? Because, you know, the states, the banks, the payment processors, they are the kings in the castle. And the legacy financial system is their knights, right? Gunpowder was co-opted, it was a tool for individual freedom, and it was co-opted by new masters and used as a tool of oppression. But this time, we've got a chance to do that again, and they can't control access to the tools for production. They can't hide the expertise that we need to create this thing and put it together. They can't hide the tools to combine the ingredients and create this thing here. We can create and code gunpowder from thin air. So my final point that I'll leave everyone with is, what are you going to create with it? Thank you.
Who thinks Rigel's band should play Baltic Honeybadger 2020?
Fuck no.
Okay, we've got time for some questions. Does anyone have anything for Rigel? Anyone? Any hands? Come on, someone must have a question. It can even be about his band. Okay, we've got some.
How'd that work thing work out?
I beg your pardon, sorry.
When you almost lost your job.
Yes, yep.
How did that work out?
So I pretty much told them to go fuck themselves in a much more polite, official way, of course. Because, you know, if they tried to go down that road, basically I was going to take them to court and say, well, I want to be a police officer forever. You've taken away my human right to express myself artistically, so I want all the money that you were going to pay me for the future there. And so I just kept doing it and, you know, managed to get to a reasonably good position. But, you know, for a couple of years I just had to keep my head down. It definitely did change some things that I had to do with the band, because, to be quite frank, at that time, if I lost my job, I'd be really fucked when you're on that side of the world and you got to travel to the other side to do what music's about. So yeah, just stuck it out, and yeah, it's an example of they try and scare you with this sort of shit, but you just got to give them the middle finger and say, no, sorry, man.
When did you start learning to code? That seemed to be later on.
About a year and a half ago.
So if anyone in here wanted to do that, where would you recommend they get started? Like, how did you do it?
So Codecademy was what I started with, but I kind of found Udemy's an easier place. But, you know, my experience, I wrote an article on Medium called Learn to Code version 1.0. And I basically talked about, like, I went to building on Bitcoin in 2008, and prior to that I thought, like, oh, you know, Bitcoin was something you had to be like Greg Maxwell or Luke Dasher or some genius to be able to work with it. But, you know, what really, it's the same thing I've been talking about today, what really got me and excited me was Wasabi and BTC Pay Server there, where these guys, you know, just took the protocol, but it was the apps on top and the way that it served individuals and kind of spoke a more human language that was a lot easier to do than I realized. And the fact that they could do this permissionlessly, you know, and Nicholas Doria's story, I think, is a fantastic example. You know, that was what really inspired me about, you know, you have a lot more agency than you think, and it's a lot easier than you think. So that's the last thing I want to leave you with, is it is way easier to get involved and lend a hand than you might think.
Thank you. Okay, next up.